Dr. Doreen Grand-Pichet is the
Dr. Doreen is an expert in autism.
Doreen Grand-Pichet.
Dr. Grand-Pichet.
Dr. Doreen Grand-Pichet.
Dr. Doreen Grand-Pichet is a visionary in the field of autism. Now you can ask her questions on Ask Dr. Doreen. Vanessa has written in and said, my son is being denied his NROTC full scholarship. He's very accomplished and has overcome challenges and no longer meets the criteria for ASD, and we need help. She goes on to mention that he's actually been a guest on the show before, and so it's lovely to have you back with us. I don't know what you want to say, Dr. Grand-Pichet, but I don't know what the requirements are for the NROTC full scholarship, but if you wanted to write specifically to me, I can certainly look into it, s.penrod@autism-live.com. But I wanted Dr. Grand-Pichet to talk about the fact that, sometimes our kiddos, as they, make progress and become teens and adults, sometimes it's a known phenomenon that they get to the point where they've made so much progress that they no longer qualify for an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. And then things change. I mean, and what they have access to, they're in sort of that in-between place, Dr. Grand-Pichet, where I still believe, like I'm just looking at my son. My son's brain functions differently than mine does. But it no longer functions in a way that's different that could be counted as a disability. But it functions differently than mine. But, there are things that he had access to before that he doesn't have access to because he doesn't have a disability. But I think a lot of times people don't know that that's a possibility. And I think because it's not well known, there aren't enough services to help a family negotiate for how do you go from having a child that's deemed disabled to having a child that functions differently but is not disabled. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Absolutely. And I have to say that I always, when I see new parents, I always tell them that, don't worry or be scared of the diagnosis, because the main reason for the diagnosis is to access certain aspects of funding, including health insurance funding, right? And so you have certain needs, and they are, I guess, severe enough to classify for a diagnosis. And that's really important to differentiate, because I'll use a different example other than ASD. So let's talk about something like, let's say, anxiety. The majority of us have anxiety over one thing or another, right? You can't really, there are very, very few people who could truthfully say, I've never had anxiety. I don't get anxious about anything. We all experience a certain amount of anxiety. The difference between the level of anxiety that most of us experience and the individual whose diagnosis is something like generalized anxiety disorder is a lot. There's a big difference, right? And the main difference, first of all, for anything to be classified as a disorder, it has to be severe enough that it interferes with functioning in two environments. Usually that is, if it's a child, it would be at home and school. If it's an adult, it would be at home and at work. So, I've used a pretty crass example in the past where I've said, you can have someone who drinks a full bottle of scotch every day, but they are, wonderful to their family and loved by their children and their wife, and they go to work and they're fully functional. They just have a 2-hour period of blackout every day or whatever it is. It does not function as enough of a symptom or series of symptoms to classify under a disorder. It just doesn't. Same thing with anxiety, same thing with ASD. So many of us will have some of the features of ASD. For instance, some of us might really love to have order in our universe, right? We want things in a particular order. Many of us get very upset if transitions occur without us being aware. Many of us are sensitive I know I am, like when I have had a very tough day or a long day, and I'm sitting in an environment where there's multiple sources of noise, like TV on, and my kids are talking, and there's background music or whatever. I, I can't handle it. My brain starts to just shut down, and I need to like leave the room and calm myself, right? But these are at a different level than individuals experience who are actually given the diagnosis of ASD. There are many language delays and language disorders or inabilities, but they don't. It's not the same as having the level of language disability that is in autism, in ASD. For an individual to classify for diagnosis, they have to have specific number of symptoms within specific subcategories of behavior. So, okay, now you have those and you get the diagnosis and you benefit from the funding that exists. And if you do the right thing, and if you receive therapies and treatments and you work really, really hard for many years, you're going to lose some or most of those symptoms. That's the whole goal of therapy, is to get rid of those issues or to make them mild enough that they're manageable. And once you hit that level, yes, your diagnosis is no longer applicable. It will not apply. Someone will remove that diagnosis. And then it becomes tough, as Shannon said, because there are certain aspects of life, maybe funding, maybe other things, that you were previously had access to, and you no longer have access to those things, and it becomes like almost feels unfair. Why do I not have access to those things anymore? And Shannon is right. There isn't, unfortunately, and sometimes you still have that need. Shannon, you know what this reminds me of is years ago, before there was health insurance coverage, a lot of our patients would receive funding from regional centers in California. Regional centers are the Department of Developmental Services, and they would provide funding for support. And it was very unfortunate because if you went from having a diagnosis of ASD or autism, this autistic disorder is what it was called in those days, and your symptoms became mild enough that your diagnosis changed to either Asperger's or pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, PDD-NOS, which was kind of like the more higher functioning version of ASD, then you no longer qualified for regional center funding. It was exactly the same process here, and we would always have to be very cautious because we felt that our children needed support, just not as much support perhaps. And so the funding system wasn't set up appropriately. I can see the same thing happening here. It almost feels unfair to lose access to certain types of grants or scholarships or funds or so on. And perhaps in this particular case, it was something completely wrong. We don't know the details here. But what I
Wrote
do
in some more just now, and she said, we're not seeking funding or services, but he's wanting to serve his country.
unbelievable,
So,
amazing.
yeah.
And that just makes no sense to me. And I hope that they do write into you, Shannon, and that we can figure out how we can help them.
I will tell you that the current policy with our armed services is that if you had a diagnosis of autism, that there is a process that you can appeal, but they will not admit you. And the United States government and their armed forces do not recognize that you could have the diagnosis and then no longer qualify for it as a disorder. They don't recognize that. But I do know personally people who have been able to get past it with a petition, and there's a process. So please write to me, and I potentially can hook you up with somebody that you can talk to whose son went through it and is now serving in the Marine Corps.
And how amazing that your son actually wants to serve his country, and what an unfortunate situation that they're not allowing him to. I think this scenario kind of falls under the, unfortunately, all I guess mental disorders. Like autism falls into a book that's called a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I was just looking because I think mine is somewhere in this office, but
Doorstop.
exactly. The DSM, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, uh, I think the military has always taken the position that if you are struggling with something that is of mental health concern, the DSM-5 exactly, and 4 and 3, all of them, the concern is basically that we don't want to put you in a situation that might make that worse. And so, with veterans, especially, the primary mental issue is PTSD, right? Post traumatic stress disorder. And so, in order to make sure that they don't begin, a lot of mental disorders become worse with stress. I mean, we all know that, right? Like, when you have stress, your anxiety increases. When you have stress, your depression increases. When you have stress, your sleep disorder gets worse. All those types of things. And I think the military is not understanding that although autism is in this book, it's a very different thing. And once you have gotten to a point where you no longer qualify for this diagnosis, you are probably not just as strong as everyone else mentally. You're probably actually quite stronger, to be honest. Like when I see with our children who recover, their resilience, their ability, their patience, their understanding, their all of their mental capabilities end up being quite strong, if not the same as their peers, even stronger.
Absolutely, I agree. That's what I see. And they said, thank you so much. She wants to know, is it discrimination? Um,
Honestly, I don't know. I wouldn't know. I just don't know enough about that.
yeah, I don't know either, but I know that there's a way around it. And I think that that's the thing to focus on if that's truly what he wants to do. So do write to me, s.penrod@autism-live.com. And let me see if I can't hook you up to some help. I want to say hello to Renee and Elvira and say thank you so much for being here. Thanks for watching Autism Live. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now.
To subscribe, click here. And if you'd like to check out some more of our videos, click here.